The 19th century was an era of mystery and intrigue when it came to photography and photo editing. In the absence of digital technology, photographers of the time had to rely on more primitive techniques to manipulate images. By hand, they would crop, tint, and retouch negatives to achieve the desired results. But what else did they do? Did they alter the content of the photographs to suit their own agendas? Can we trust the images we have of historical events as a true representation of the past? By the mid-1800s, photo editing was shrouded in mystery and secrecy. Photographers of the time were able to manipulate photographs to suit their own agendas, often without leaving a trace. The tools of their trade were primitive and the effects they could achieve were limited. But what kind of effects did they use? Were they able to add elements that were not present in the original frame? Did they airbrush out certain undesirable elements of a photograph? Were they able to make an image look older or more weathered than it really was? Or were techniques of the time simply limited to adjusting the brightness and contrast of a photograph? Through tinting, cropping, and retouching negatives, 19th century photographers could alter the content of a photograph to suit a specific purpose. They could add elements that were not present in the original frame, or airbrush out certain undesirable elements. In some cases, they even altered the color or texture of an image to make it look aged or weathered. But how far did these manipulations go? Can we trust the images we have of historical events as a true representation of the past? Were they able to edit out entire skies and buildings, making it almost impossible to detect the changes? Looking back, we can find examples of colleges of photography that pioneered the development of techniques for retouching photographs. These colleges' mission was to teach photographers how to manipulate images in various ways, such as tinting, cropping, and retouching negatives. This enabled photographers to create desired effects, such as adding elements to a photograph that weren't present or altering the color or texture of an image. They also taught photographers how to airbrush out certain undesirable elements of a photograph. This was particularly useful for retouching images to remove any blemishes or imperfections. Taught at these colleges, photographers used etching and modeling photo editing techniques to manipulate images in various ways. Through etching, photographers could create a high contrast, low relief effect in a photograph by darkening some areas and lightening others. This allowed photographers to emphasize certain details in a photograph, such as facial features and clothing. Modeling, on the other hand, was used to create a three-dimensional effect in a photograph. Photographers would use this technique to create the illusion of depth by manipulating the light and shadows in an image. This allowed photographers to make an image look more realistic and lifelike. These photo editing techniques were popular among 19th century photographers as they enabled them to manipulate images to suit their own agendas. They could make a photograph look older or more weathered than it really was, or they could add elements that weren't present on the negative. We can find countless examples of these kinds of images sifting through the historical record. On closer inspection, we can see a number of expertly executed photo manipulation techniques. It seems as if though anything was possible. Just like Photoshop today, these old-world Photoshops were able to make someone smaller, change their facial structure, remove blemishes on faces, and even completely crop out objects from their hands, foregrounds, or backgrounds. The unfortunate issue we have today is that some of these photos may be taken as a direct and factual historical record. If this is the case, how can we ever decipher between which photos were completely real and which were edited? How can we know how much photo manipulation really took place? Another astounding discovery is the direct painting of objects within a photograph. Clearly, when we zoom in and inspect these photos on our screens, we can see the difference between reality and a painting. When we take a closer look at some of these photos, we can clearly see painted objects within them, from people, cars, and buildings themselves. There are numerous photos with other objects painted directly in them. Going back to etching and modeling, we can even find old-world copying and pasting techniques. Some of these historical photos we can identify clear-cut lines of copying and pasting from a completely different photo. We can follow these lines along the edges of these buildings and objects and see that the photo has been manipulated in a way to include objects not originally there. Some time ago, a mysterious theory began to circulate about a technique used by some photographers to manipulate images. This technique was referred to as the vanilla sky effect and was said to involve airbrushing out entire skies and buildings from a photograph. The result was a photograph that appeared to have been taken in a different location than it actually was. This allowed photographers to create images that were more aesthetical to them, perhaps, while also disguising the true location of the photo. But how true is this theory? What evidence is there to support it? Were photographers of the 19th century really able to airbrush out entire skies and buildings? If so, can we trust the images we have of historical events as a true representation of the past? Or were the techniques of the time simply limited to making small adjustments? The mysterious vanilla sky effect has been the subject of much speculation among photographers and historians. It is said to involve airbrushing out entire skies and buildings from a photograph to create a picture that appears to have been taken in a different location than it actually was. This enabled photographers to manipulate the content of a photograph to suit a specific purpose. For example, Victorian-era photographs of the London skyline often featured the same stretch of buildings and landmarks, making it appear as though the city hadn't changed in decades. It is widely believed that some of these photographs were manipulated using the vanilla sky effect to remove certain buildings and add others in order to create a more pleasing composition. What other evidence is there to support this theory? Were photographers of the 19th century really airbrushing out entire skies and buildings? And if so, for what purpose? The truth is, we may never know the full extent of the photo editing techniques used by 19th century photographers. We can only speculate as to how the images we have of the past were altered, and to what degree. However, one thing is certain. Some of the photographs of this era can't be taken at face value and should be viewed with a critical eye. Which ones? That is for you to decide.